I request everyone to kindly take their seat so that we can commence the program. Good evening, everyone. We are extremely delighted to have you all here today. I'm Deepshikha Singh from Mobile Creches, and I extend a warm welcome to each one of you, to all those who are present in the lecture hall, to those who are attending virtually, and also those who are watching the live streaming of this event. So as you know that in the past, we have been organizing the Anita Kaul Memorial Lecture series. This time again, this year, we have gathered together to commemorate her achievements, her remarkable contribution to the Indian education system and beyond. So the theme of the 5th Anita Kaul Memorial Lecture is The Elephant Outside the Classroom, Education for a Democratic India. It is our great pleasure to have our speaker and chair, Farah Naqvi, a renowned writer and activist. She'll be delivering the lecture today. And Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, an eminent educationist, she'll be chairing the session. So may I please request Farah ji and Dr. Gopinath to kindly join on the dais and take their seat. Thank you so much. So now I invite Sanjay Kaul for addressing a welcome and the opening of the session.
Ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all of you. And again, from my behalf and on behalf of the Rainbow Foundation, Center for Equity Studies and Mobile Creches, I welcome you all to the 5th Memorial Lecture. We are meeting after a gap of 3 years. As some of you would know that last year we had to have a webinar because we couldn't meet in person. So I'm particularly happy that so many of you could join us today. I'm also happy that a lot of people have been able to log in today. Anita had a huge fan following and people she'd worked with in Karnataka, for instance, and they were happy to have this webinar format that was the idea of having a combined in-person as well as a webinar format. We meet today in rather difficult times. Our economy is under stress and our society is seeing an uncomfortable and highly disconcerting divide. And these fissures are becoming all too apparent. It is in this context that this year's lecture theme, The Elephant Outside the Room, which has been a theme selected by Farah, is both timely and extremely relevant. Farah fortunately had also worked and known Anita well, and we are privileged to have her deliver this year's lecture. And those of you who known Farah as a writer and activist, I'm sure will find that this year's lecture will be bold, courageous, and hard-hitting in a way that will spark thinking and conversations about some of the real issues in the education space, some of the issues that unfortunately do not get the attention they merit. We are also privileged to have with us Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath, the chair of this year's lecture. Dr. Gopinath is known to several of you as an eminent educationist, a leading political scientist. She was for many years the principal of LSR and is the founder of WISCOMP, an organization that has been championing the cause of enhancing the role of women as agents of social change in South Asia. Also, I'd like to recognize Amrita Jain, chairperson of Mobile Creches, a key sponsor of this lecture series, along with the Rainbow Foundation and the Center for Equity Studies. We also have with us Harsh Vandar, who germinated the idea for this lecture series, and extend a warm welcome to him. I also particularly like to welcome K.N. Srivastava, Director of India International Center, and take this opportunity to thank the ISE for the excellent arrangements they have made for this event. I'm also happy that we have in person today Pamela Philippos, who delivered the last year's lecture, as well as Harish Khare, who chaired last year's lecture. Thank you, Pamela and Harish, for joining us today. We also have Anita Rampal, who delivered the 3rd lecture. Thank you, Anita. On a more personal note, I particularly like to welcome Kamlu Singh, Ramidar and Bobby Kaul, the senior-most members of the Kriplani and Kaul families. Ramidar, Bobby Bhai, and Kamlu. Geeta Kriplani, Anita's sister, and Rohan, our son, are also here with us today. Many of you who had known Anita would remember her as a rather unconventional civil servant. And yet Anita was able to find space in this rather rigidly structured civil service that we have here, we have in India, to reach out to the most underprivileged members of our society and make a significant difference in their lives. And that is what we hope and wish for, to use this lecture platform to carry forward a rich legacy by providing a voice for those that need it most and who do not have it so easily. The Kaul and Kriplani families have also been finding other small ways of supporting the causes that Anita stood for. As an example, we have been supporting underprivileged children of rainbow homes through the Anita Kaul Scholarship to enable them to get through their graduation and move into rewarding careers. I'm happy that two of these girl graduates are here with us. Have they reached? Rani and Anjali are here with us today. They've got placements in these well-established organizations, and please give them a big hand. And would one of you like to say a word? Yeah, come here. So Rani is from Calcutta and Anjali is from Hyderabad. They've flown in all the way from Bangalore to be here with us today. Come. Yeah.
Good evening, everyone. I'm so happy to be here and seeing all of you smiling, at us, seeing us happy. And that's how making you feel smile. So basically, I came from Calcutta to Bangalore in 2017 for my degree. I studied in St. Aloysius College. I did my 3 years degree in BA, specialized in English literature, journalism, and political science. I've completed my degree with first class grade distinction. And I was feeling so proud of me. And I'm so happy that I was chosen to be part of this scholarship. Not only me, many are more. And they are all doing well. I just wanted you all know that this Anita Kaul scholarship helped and supported us in all the ways we needed them. Thank you.
Yes. And this is Anjali from Hyderabad Rainbow Home. And I have done my BSW. Right now I'm working as a fieldwork assistant. Just I want to share a few words about Anita Kaul ma'am. I didn't even see her face till now. Just I know in which way and at the right time she helps. In the name of her family also helping to the poor children, whoever they in need. Her help is reaching who are really needy children. And I'm so happy I'm part of that. And right now I can say that I got so much of courage and a few things to do my journey rest of the life. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Before I step off the stage, I would also like to touch upon a subject that has been close to my heart. In late 2015, as far back as 15, I had embarked on writing a book, and Anita was to have joined me in that journey as a person to critique, comment, and provide critical inputs. Unfortunately, a sudden and unexpected demise in 2016 had put a full stop to the project for several years. But during the lockdown, I resumed research and writing, and I'm pleased to say that Routledge is in the final stages, finally, of publishing the book. The book, of course, is dedicated to Anita Kaul. And while Anita was not going to be around to provide her insights, rigor, and gentle critique, it is my belief that the book, by putting forth what I call a people-first implementable development agenda, will also spark important and much-needed conversations akin to the lecture series and akin to the values that Anita cherished most. Thank you again, and I now request Dr. Meenakshi Gopinath to take charge of the event, and thank you all once again for this joining us this evening.
Thank you, Sanjay, and a very warm welcome to all of you. May I now request Harsh Mandir, who quite literally needs no introduction, to come up and take forward the proceedings. Harsh, of course, has been the moral conscience, the contemporary moral conscience of our society. And just by being the kind of person he is, he exhorts us, he holds up the mirror to us and exhorts us to move out of our comfort zones. So what else can I say? Except that courage, integrity, compassion, empathy, these words have meaning because you exist and you do what you do. Thank you. Thank you, Harsh.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi, Sanjay, Farah, and all of you who've gathered here today. My heart is completely filled up. Firstly, remembering Anita Kaul. I could spend the evening talking about a lot of things, and I recognize that I just have a few minutes. My professional association, some highlights. As a young collector, some of the most exciting moments was the literacy campaign, and Anita was, around there. I remember in my district, 30,000 volunteers we were able to mobilize. It was unthinkable, and the kind of love for their country, for their people, that people have and we never acknowledge. The literacy campaign was one moment when we were able to recognize how much of a resource our young people are. And Anita had a great deal to do with enabling that imagination, and that civil servants could be part of a people's campaign of that scale and value. At a more immediate and direct level, after I left the civil service and started living, based myself in Delhi, along with fighting hate, I did feel that there was something I needed to do to build relationships of solidarity with Gandhiji used to talk about that last person. So almost literally that last person in a city is the homeless child, the homeless woman and man, whom we see every day of our lives, except maybe during the lockdown. But we know so little about them. We care even less. And the fact that we needed to find ways to intervene. Very briefly, starting with homeless children, we have something like 75,000 children on the streets of Delhi. And the idea was actually at some level, I think the world's greatest ideas are always the simplest. Learning from Sister Cyril, she was running Loreto Convent in Calcutta, and one day a street girl was raped just outside the gate of her school one evening. And the epiphany that she had was that, but at the time when the child needed protection, the school was empty, as all our schools are empty. And I will open up the doors of my school for every homeless girl. And something started then, and when we got into it, I said, I must try to work this in government school systems, public school systems. And the idea that you can actually, if every government school across the country opens up in this way, we don't have to have a single child who sleeps under the open sky. This idea seemed such an extraordinarily impossible one. But when we piloted it, and then Anshu and Anita were in the ministry, and they went to see that this was possible. And it was because of these two civil servants that it is now part of official government policy today, even today, that any government school can be opened up as a residential school simultaneously for homeless children. And it was that kind of belief that drew me very close to Anita and the two beautiful young women who came up this evening, Rani and Anjali, are just a glimpse of what is possible if we, I said the physical spaces exist. It's the spaces in our hearts that do not. if we open up the spaces in our hearts, what will be accomplished together. So that is what I owe most to Anita. And we were proposing after she retired a long association. The very day, by coincidence, the very day that she had a heart attack, she was supposed to come into our center. We'd prepared a room for her and she was going to begin to work that day. And so that's Anita. I think we'll hear a little more about her, about the two fine women sitting here. What can I say? Meenakshi scolded me outside saying, just one instruction, don't say anything more than one line about me. And since then, I've been just struggling in my mind what that one line would be. I think we all know her, we respect her. She's a person of extraordinary, in her leadership for 2 decades, the college that she was principal of was elevated and often chosen as the best college in the entire country. That as an accomplishment, I think few would be able to match, but also her interest in questions of conflict and conflict resolution and so on. Plus, she's a person of extraordinary gentleness and grace and generosity, with all the words that she said about me, of which I was so unworthy. And about Farah, even harder. One sentence, okay. Farah and I also go back a long way. I just wanted to say that just professionally, both of us were in the National Advisory Council and collaborated on many things. But I think most importantly today, when we look back, was on drafting the communal violence prevention bill. But Farah has sort of over the years emerged as a feisty, brave, courageous voice against the politics of hate that we seem to be enveloped in. And therefore, the subject that she is going to speak to us about, when a child is growing up, what is she learning outside the classroom in the world that we live in? I mean, prejudice against Muslim children, Dalit children, has become so routinized that we don't even see it. So what transpires? From where does a child come? What does she experience within the classroom? And how much do we remember that, education is not primarily about getting the highest grades and being able to enter Ivy League colleges at the end of your schooling. It is about learning to be a better human being. And so I really value Farah's choice of subject, and I think we'll all learn a great deal from it. Thank you again. Thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, the Kaul family. Thank you, Mobile Creches, Rainbow Foundation. And thank you, all of you, for joining us to remember a woman who I think represents what is finest in public service in our country today. Thank you.
Thank you, Harsh. May I now invite Aditi Mehta to come and share her thoughts with us. Aditi is a 1979 batch IAS officer of the Rajasthan cadre, a batchmate and dear friend of Anita, who shares the same values in favor of inclusion, equity, probity in governance and empathy, and support for the poor and underprivileged. Post her superannuation, Aditi has been an active voice against oppression and injustice in all walks of life. And she had served as the additional chief secretary in the government of Karnataka and in several leadership roles in the government of India. And I remember her as a dazzling actor on stage in her college days, during her college days, where everyone was vying to act with her. This is something I don't know if many of you know about this, but this is true. Over to you, Aditi. Thank you.
Thank you, Meenakshi. Thank you. Thank you, Sanjay, for giving me this opportunity to just, share with you a small personal tribute to Anita. As Minnie said, Anita and I were batchmates, and we were among a fairly large handful of women who joined the service in '79. The economy had not yet liberalized, and despite the very real memories of the emergency, disenchantment with the state had not set in. And the luster to the progressive role envisaged for the state had not yet been totally tarnished. We joined the service in the hope of channeling our aspirations to be useful to society. Anita and I were smoking companions. 43 years ago, that was a bit of a no-no. But smoking allowed us moments of quiet time. We were bumming off cigarettes from each other as probationers, that habit continuing as we rose up the bureaucratic ladder. Iron did not often, actually. A shared glance across a crowded seminar room would signal to each other, and we would exit, smoke, gossip, express our frustrations, often re-enter in the warmth of an affirmed common position. Iron did not enter Anita's soul despite her steely resolve professionally. She was one of the leading lights of the RTE legislation, something we are all inordinately proud of, against very heavy odds. It was not easy for Anita, one of the most trusted of the small team of senior Shastri Bhavan bureaucrats, to find the balance between the radical expectations of educationists and NGO workers, and finally what became the legislation approved by Parliament. It was the belief Anita evoked among the world of ordinary teachers spread across the length and breadth of the country, and her superiors, including parliamentarians, that made the legislation go through. More significantly almost was her role in getting the act implemented. That took Anita to remote corners of the country to explain how the act was not only desirable, but feasible. Working in the man's world of dense prejudice, power play, and thick glass ceilings, Anita defied many odds and rose to the top of her profession. She was, of course, aided by the most loving, appreciative, and supportive of husbands, Sanjay, who helped her crystallize her political beliefs and also sense of self. Anita's was no small achievement, given that the political space was ideologically shifting to the right. The room for bureaucrats who required that the state itself shoulder heavier responsibilities was getting further and further constricted. It was Anita's sheer dedication, passion, and integrity that allowed her to make her job her vocation. We were smoking partners. I recall the first time we met in Mussoorie was to exchange cigarettes. Well, the smoke is gone. Anita's not there. I've given up. But the fragrance of a deep and shared bond remains constant. The colonialist Winston Churchill had famously remarked that the Battle of Waterloo was fought and won on the playing fields of Eton. Well, I would like to think that the battle for the idea of India will be won on the dusty playing fields of state schools that Anita so assiduously helped to enrich and expand, ultimately, so that the long arc of destiny ways to justice, to equity, and education for all. Thank you.
Thank you, Aditi, for that sharing. It brings Anita even closer to this space. Thank you so much. It is indeed a privilege to participate in this event and to be amidst all of you today as we honor Anita Kaul's memory and celebrate her work. Heartfelt thanks to Harsh Mandir, Sanjay Kaul, the Center for Equity Studies, Mobile Creches, and the Rainbow Foundation for this opportunity. Today, we once again applaud Anita for her indomitable spirit, her faith in the power of the people, not just to be the objects, but the subjects of their history, for making despair unconvincing and hope practical, for her untiring efforts for policy and by implication civil servants to be touched by the heat and dust of subaltern aspirations, and for flipping the discourse from victimhood to that of agency, and also emphasizing the need for education, from the need for education, moving to the right to education. And as Aditi shared, doggedly piloting and mobilizing for the passage of the landmark RTE in 2009, with a consummate faith in the potential of the Constitution to become a people's constitution, and not letting it remain an aspiration in the directive principles of state policy. We draw inspiration today from her ability to envision government interventions beyond the immutable shackles and fault lines of caste and gender that deny equity and access to education for the multitude. We draw inspiration from her ability to dream as early as in the late 90s and early 1990s, what seemed the impossible dream, an RTE. She was personally transformed, as Aditi mentioned, by her engagement in the National Literacy Mission. It made social justice, transparency, democratic and responsive governance, and a rights-based approach, participatory and inclusive praxis, the leitmotif of her striving. Her work with the DPEP, as Anita will vouch, the Mahila Samakhyas, and as well as the joyful learning template of the Nalli Kali, now a veritable movement in 7 states, was infused by this impulse. The child-centric approach and the concerns of gender equity from then on were to become integral to our scripts on primary education. And we also draw inspiration for the manner in which she so seamlessly balanced the roles of social activist and civil servant, using her exemplary skills of persuasion, as Aditi shared with us, to overcome resistance to ideas to change. Our admiration to Anita for the manner in which she was able to declass herself, break hierarchies, transgress the persona of the conventional bureaucrat, and reach out to her constituency as an equal co-traveler. Her uncommon empathy, her unorthodox approach ushered in refreshing changes in the school education sector, non-prescriptive and always participatory. Stories about how she would sit on the floor with the trainees at workshops across the country are now legion, with emphasis on child effort rather than teacher instruction. She questioned received structures, the role of the textbook as canon, its many prescriptions and its many proscriptions, constantly interrogating the monocultures of the mind and resisting tendencies towards homogenization. In her continuous questioning and transgressing of unequal power structures in the world of education, in many ways she combined in herself the role of both Paulo Freire and bell hooks, interrogating the banking concept of education and nurturing what today is described as the constructivist classroom. We salute the ways in which she envisioned the 25% EWS reservation, not as quotas or do-gooding or patronizing the disenfranchised, but as a context to shake the privileged out of their smug comfort zones. I think she believed as much in sort of giving comfort to the afflicted as in afflicting the comfortable, especially when they're comfortably wrong. And she viewed the classroom as a space where children eat, sit, and live together across caste, class, and gender divisions. And this is how she deftly combined the language of critique with the language of possibility. There is a very telling incident narrated in Rajni Sibbal's book, Women of Influence, that captures the spirit of Anita Kaul, the activist civil servant, the rebel reformer. Her son Rohan, who is in our midst, will remember it. He was in an elite school in Delhi, like the children of many bureaucrats, and it was a fancy dress competition. And Anita insisted, while he wanted to be Superman or something as glamorous as that, Anita insisted that he go dressed as the National Literacy Mission. And he had G inscribed on the back of this black robe. I'm sure Rohan will share what that did to the way in which his consciousness was transformed. But I think that was Anita. And in a way, her life and message to all of us resonates with a deep wisdom that what you leave behind is not what is engraved in stone, but what is woven into the lives of others. Anita changed the lives of people. She changed Sanjay's life, he tells me. She touched people in profound ways. And she always imagined the classroom as a sanctuary, a healing space, a space that is non-threatening and promotes a safe and healthy environment, making children free of trauma and anxiety, where learning becomes joyous and participatory. And this is perhaps the best time to segue into the theme of the lecture that Harsh had mentioned earlier, the elephant outside the classroom. And who better to speak to the issues at stake than the intrepid writer, activist, Farah Naqvi, a shining star in the field of journalism, deeply committed to the ideas of constitutionalism, secularism, issues of gender, education, and minority rights. A person who so evocatively and fearlessly speaks truth to power, and whose passion to give voice and agency to those in the shadows of marginality is matched only by her incisive analysis and willingness to put herself on the line, like Harsh, and not to mince words. But above all, in her ability to disagree without being disagreeable. Today, she turns the searchlight on the persistent challenges to the fragile canvas of coexistence that was sought to be woven into the post-independence construction of the idea of India. She draws our attention to the tentacles of prejudice and exclusion that threaten to pervade our classrooms, turning them into potential akhadas, arenas of identity conflicts and divisiveness. She exhausts us to see clearly what tends to be invisibilized, in the hope that we may find antidotes to help preserve the transformative potential of education. With an education system that she describes as one of the largest in the world, with 1.5 million students, the stakes for the sustenance of an inclusive democracy are monumental. Farah exhorts us to see with fresh eyes and begin by doing away with denial. Ask the questions that need to be asked. And as poet Alec Derwent-Hope said, to generations which we leave behind, they taught a difficult, selfless skill to show the mask, beyond the mask, beyond the mask, and to our another vista, where the mind no longer asks for answers, but to know what questions which we failed to ask. So over to you, Farah. We wait to hear you with bated breath and to literally see the elephant outside the room. Welcome.
Thank you so much, Meenakshi ji, for those very, very kind and warm words of welcome. Thank you for asking me to speak today in memory of Anita Kaul. As Sanjay said, she was someone I knew and deeply admired. I was fresh out of college. a young consultant in the famous Shastri Bhavan. And she was already IAS when we met. So there was a huge power imbalance there. But that is the thing about people like Anita. And there were other civil servants. There was Anil Bodia, there was Amitabh Mukhopadhyay, people who are gone and whom I miss very much. They listened to young people and they listened to our passionate ideas, even as they gently told us this is not entirely implementable, but it's a wonderful, wonderful idea. But it is from watching people like Anita Kaul at work that I learned how to craft the commitment of my activism into workable policy. And I remember warmly, the literacy campaigns have been mentioned. I remember very, very, very warmly intense discussions outside many rural schoolrooms during the literacy campaigns with Anita Kaul. The conversations were always interspersed with laughter. Anita's characteristically twinkling eyes and a charming, very naughty smile. And I have very, very warm and intense moments of learning from Anita during those literacy campaigns. It was in the 90s. So it was a long time back, but the memory is very, very fresh. And I think Anita would have cared very, very much about the subject of today's lecture. Let me preface the talk by just saying that, look, as an activist, I always have hope, always. That makes us vulnerable to disappointment. But I stand before you today with the fulsome conviction of that hope and the utter vulnerability. Things can change. That is the purpose of this conversation, this lecture, this talk today. So the title of the talk, The Elephant Outside the Classroom, it's quite simply just, it's about the big things we don't talk about enough in the context of schools. Exposing the elephants in the rooms of all our lives is important for all human endeavor, after all. I mean, it's important personally, it's important for our mental health to talk about, to excavate the demons of our childhoods, to dig out those roots. They might be gnarly and ugly and uncomfortable and twisted, but we need to do that as a person. And we need to do that as a society, to talk about the really big things that make us acutely uncomfortable. And so I hope this talk makes all of us acutely uncomfortable. The reason we don't talk about this stuff is because sometimes we feel, well, of course, we feel very uncomfortable, but also we feel helpless. We can't do anything about this, so what's the point of talking? At other times, it just doesn't seem important in our scheme or our immediate priorities at the moment. And so we keep ignoring these things and we fail to have that big conversation. And all that happens is this elephant becomes so big and so socially, politically, even personally explosive that then we just have no choice but to keep pushing it out of the room, but it pushes right back in. We are at a point of crisis as a country and as educators of our children. And if we want a democratic future for India, if we want democratic education for India, a future where we cherish the ideals of equality, where it's not just rhetoric, and we are willing to fight for it through democratic debate and dialogue, then we have to confront the divides in our classrooms. That is the elephant I want to speak about. The social divide and the hate that is infesting our society and therefore our classrooms, because no classroom is going to be an oasis of equality in a highly unequal world. That's just the reality. But these social divides in our classrooms, we have completely lost the ability to confront squarely. They've been pushed beyond discussion in education policy. And as this elephant has become actually bigger and stronger and more conspicuous, the silences in the spaces of education have gotten deeper. And coded interactions within classrooms have become endemic and very much the norm. You know, is a student citizen, and I think of them as, and emphasize the citizen, is a student citizen in our constitutional scheme of things expected to surrender her human rights and her dignity as a precondition for accessing education? Well, the answer is no, right? When they walk into a classroom, they walk in with the full bundle of fundamental rights. But these rights are being violated every day behind the closed doors of the classroom, and we need to fling those doors open. On July 20th, 2022, Indra Kumar Meghwal, a 9-year-old Dalit boy in class 3, got thirsty and committed the god-awful sin of drinking from the pot meant for the upper caste teachers. And for that, he was beaten mercilessly by Chhel Singh, his upper caste teacher, at the Saraswati Vidya Mandir in Surana village in Jalore district of Rajasthan. It's a case many of us may have read about. What you may not have noticed is that for 25 days, a desperate family traveled 1,300 kilometers through 8 hospitals to try and save this little boy's life. But he died on August 13th in an Ahmedabad hospital, actually 300 kilometers away from his home. That happened in a school. One could, in fact, argue that, well, in this death, a silence was broken. So there is, ergo, no elephant. We do talk. We write op-eds. But the fact is that nothing changed in the scores of schools across this country. And the fact is that the rebuttal and the denial machinery is alive and well. The Rajasthan SCPCR, the State Commission for the Protection of Child Rights, has subsequently denied that there was any caste discrimination in the boy's murder. I doubt very much if the ideas of Ambedkar, the caste system or caste oppression, were ever discussed in that school, either before or after his death. Instead, on August 23rd, let me share another piece of news. News came from Badoi in Uttar Pradesh, where a Dalit girl was beaten by the former village head, Manoj Kumar Dubey, because she did not have a uniform and she said her father hadn't bought one. On September 5th, in a higher secondary government school in Balia district, this time an 11-year-old Dalit boy, beaten by a metal rod and locked up in the classroom. And what was his crime is that he touched the upper caste teacher's motorcycle. The teacher, Krishna Mohan Sharma, was finally suspended. But the only thing the principal apparently said to the Dalit boy's mother was, now he's suspended, don't escalate the matter. What does it mean? Let's ask ourselves, what does it mean to not escalate such a matter? It means the elephant. It means the big things we're supposed to silently accept and not to speak about. Perhaps we feel relieved that there is the Atrocities Act, the Prevention of Scheduled Tribes and Scheduled Castes Prevention of Atrocities Act, to deal with these daily horrors so that we don't have to. It's like outsourcing a social problem to a law. And we feel relieved that we here in this room and in the classroom and interpersonally don't have to engage with these horrors. The law is there, let it deal with it. Well, let me tell you that the conviction rates under the Atrocities Act are abysmal. They range from 22 to 26% over the last few years, give or take. And quite honestly, for every case of egregious physical violence of the kind that I have described, there is the unreported and the unreportable. There is the death by 1,000 cuts every day, of othering, of discrimination, of humiliating, of making a child feel less than, of robbing them of the fullness of confidence and rights. What we do is hector them instead with facile notions of their duty. And we cover up our silences with abstract notions of nationalism. Love the nation, behave united, and stay silent. That's what we tell them. You know, we read of these lives and these deaths and these beatings and these slurs, and what does our media call them? We call them incidents. The very word incident has an isolated kind of quality about it, doesn't it? It's random. It deliberately disguises the structural nature of the problem. It also seems to happen in faraway places out there, in places that are called Balia, Badoi, Jalor. It also happens only in government schools. So let's shift to Delhi and to Noida and to Gurgaon and shift to the private schools where millions of our children study. The last estimate I read was 35% and more. Look at the elite schools. Look at the kinds of schools where people in this room have probably sent their children for education. A recent book by Nazia Iram captures some of this reality of the elite, of the privileged, of the private schools. For example, a day after a bomb blast in Europe in 2018, a teacher at a popular Noida school read out the headlines to her class 6 students. One student loudly called out the name of the only Muslim boy in class and said, "Arey, ye kya kar diya tumne?" The teacher heard the exchange but did not say anything. Some of the things that kids in primary schools are apparently calling their peers are Osama, Baghdadi, Mullah, go to Pakistan. I have come across in Delhi other favorites: Katwa, Jihadi, Musalla. We need to say this to acknowledge it. From the extreme violence to the name calling and to the everyday seemingly benign othering, it is actually the same arc. It's part of the problem, the same problem. And it's really not new. So I will share with you a story. 13 some years ago, a friend's son was in a fancy Delhi preschool. It was voted by an education journal as, at some stage, the best preschool in India. So you can imagine how fancy it was. But it decided to schedule its annual PTA meeting, the Parent-Teacher Association meeting, on Eid ul-Fitr. Now, Eid ul-Fitr, as we know, that's the big Eid. That's the Eid that comes at the end of the Ramzan fast, and it's a joyous occasion, and it is probably the biggest Muslim festival of the year, on par with Diwali for Hindus, that is just coming, and on par with Christmas for Christians. So my friend went. She gently chided the principal and the teacher, but she went for the PTA. But there was even more to come. So one day a phone call came from the principal. You know, it was Eid on November 17th, and now December 17th is Muharram. And is that important to you? Because you see, due to the Commonwealth Games, we lost a lot of working days, and there are only 3 children who observe this religion. And one of them is a Pakistani diplomat's child, and they are out of town anyway, and none of our teachers observe it. So I will speak to the one remaining parent to keep the school open if it's okay with you. My friend was in a fury. The same preschool had declared Karwa Chauth a holiday just a few days earlier because all the teachers were fasting. And she ranted and she raved, but she too did not escalate the matter. She said, "I don't want my 3.5-year-old to be singled out as the one with the troublesome mum." So from an upper class South Delhi mum to a poor Dalit woman, from the everyday othering to egregious, terrible physical violence, neither could escalate matters. Their vulnerable child's well-being was at stake. And I think this is one reason why this elephant grows so fat, is that children are just too young to take up cudgels on their own behalf, and parents are too frightened to ratchet things up. Now, you could say that this is an overreaction on my part, and that the preschool was, after all, being nice by asking for permission to keep the school open on Muharram. But, you know, they were not. They were telling her that she was different, and they were asking her very politely to conform to the cultural mainstream. That's what they were doing. And holidays on religious occasions are really not matters of personal favors between individual parents and schools. They are a social contract between institutions and a secular country that they flourish in. And it doesn't matter, and it shouldn't matter, if there isn't a single child who celebrates this religion. So let me give you another example of the everyday stuff. A geography teacher in a leading private school in Delhi started discussing the exam result of the wrong child with a very confused Muslim mother in a PTA meeting. The teacher then re-looked at her notes and said, "Oh, sorry, I get so confused between Azan and Farhan and Rehan, who, by the way, are three entirely different boys in three entirely different sections. And I doubt she ever made the same mistake with Rajesh, Rakesh, and Suresh, which also sound pretty similar." So that was an offensive moment. But it's the kind of power imbalance moment when, both parties in an interaction choose to kind of pass things off as cute and as silly. And it was far from cute. It was not cute. Muslim names were decidedly odd to her, and she made that very, very clear. So look, prejudice in schoolrooms is not always going to be obvious to an onlooker. Any of us can walk into a classroom and frankly, we will be unable to see it. There are no visible signs of wounds on any child. They are all in some kind of uniform. They will all put on their sweetest, most obedient, docile face. They will all stand up. I'm sure many of us have been to school. They will all stand up and say, "Good morning, ma'am." If you ask them, they will sing Jan Gan Man on cue, and they will all sit down. And we will all feel pleased at this performative unity. What we don't see, because it is so normalized and so invisibilized, is the many forms of difference each of these children will encounter through their day in school across multiple sites. There are the obvious things that we do occasionally read about, the different access to facilities, drinking water, toilets, midday meals. We do read about this. The name calling, bullying, teasing, beating, kicking, slapping, spitting. Yes, we read about this too. But there is the other stuff that's invisible to our eyes that are wide shut at the moment. Let's do a physical mapping of a classroom, of any classroom. Who is prevented from sitting in front? Who is seated in isolation? Who is segregated? Do a sociological study. Do the good old-fashioned participant observation, anthropology, sit in a classroom and do a study of the teaching and learning. Who does the teacher address? Whom does she avoid? Whom does she make eye contact with? Whose doubts are never clarified? Who is discouraged from asking questions? Whose notebook is never checked? Who is humiliated and sniggered at publicly if they give the wrong answer? Whose notebook is chucked at them in disgust? Who is discouraged from dreaming and aspiring? And who gets the harsher and more frequent punishment? Let's also then do a study of the leadership and participation. That's what we're supposed to be grooming our children for. So what kind of leadership are some children getting? Who can never be selected as class monitor? I challenge either of us to name the last time you heard of a Dalit kid or a tribal kid or a Muslim kid being chosen class monitor, head boy, head girl. It doesn't happen. Never the class monitor, never invited to lead assembly, not allowed to lead school functions, not invited to represent the school for important programs, not invited to represent the class when visitors come, not involved in cultural programs. You do this across a range, a series of classrooms, and the pattern will become clear. Several years ago, Human Rights Watch did a report foregrounding the experience of some of the most vulnerable children in our schools. And it helps validate what I have just said. And I want to share some of the stories from that report in the children's own words. 8-year-old Meena from the Ghasia tribe studies at a government primary school in Sonbhadra district in Uttar Pradesh. Here's what Meena says. If we go to drink water or to the toilet and accidentally touch a child from another community, they yell at us saying, "You dirty Ghasia, why are you touching us?" And then they go and complain to the teacher. Then the teacher scolds us, saying, "Why are you touching these children? We are made to sit separately. The teacher doesn't even sit in our class. She sits in the other class and just tells us, read or write, do whatever you want. We don't eat lunch with the other children. If we ever go to ask for food, the cook shouts at us saying, go away, you eat so much. Sahir is 12 years old. Grade 5, a government school in Qutub Vihar in southwest Delhi. Here's what Sahir says. We don't feel like going to school because the teachers always single us out to beat us. The Hindu boys laugh at us. The teachers don't let us participate in any sports. Class monitors are always chosen from among Hindu boys, and they always complain about the Muslim boys. The teachers, of course, never believe us, and they insult us by saying, you kids come to school just for your scholarship money. You don't want to study. Whenever they check our workbooks, they make negative comments and throw the workbook at our face. Another boy, Javed, from the same school said, the Hindu boys are allowed to go to the toilet, but we are not given permission. Whenever teachers are angry, they call us mullahs. Hindu boys also call us mullahs because our fathers have beards. And Sahir added, one of our classmates' father came to submit a form and the teacher referred to him as the man with the beard in front of the whole class. And she laughed hard. And the Hindu children laughed too. And we felt terrible. Only Hindu boys are happy in this school. 12-year-old Priya belongs to the Dome community, a Dalit population that works largely as sweepers and garbage collectors. And she discovered how terrible it was to be a Dome when her classmates in Gaya in Bihar pointed this out. Here's what Priya says. Other children don't sit with us. Some of the girls say, yuck, you people are Dome, dirty caste. We are good caste. I feel bad. I curse myself. Why did God make me Dome caste so I could be mistreated? Salman, 13, is one of 3 Muslim boys in grade 7 in the upper primary school in Nandnagri. Most children participating in cultural programs are Hindu. I want to participate in cultural programs too. I even learned a patriotic song, but the class monitor in charge of deciding refused to let me participate in the event. Sometimes I don't like being Muslim. I feel insecure when there are Hindu-Muslim fights because most Hindus get together and surround the Muslims. My mother asks me not to stray too far from home when there are communal tensions. And the last story I will share is of Sarah, 14 years old, who regrets deeply choosing Urdu instead of Sanskrit as her second language in the upper primary school in Nandnagri, because all the girls who chose Urdu sat in the same classroom. There are teachers, this is Sarah's words, teachers who say things like, you Muslim people have no brains. You read the Quran, pray to Allah, but you don't respect knowledge. A month ago, we had a substitute teacher who said the floods in Uttarakhand happened because Muslims have opened meat shops there. She said that it's a place of worship for Hindus, but Muslims go there and treat God badly. It's because of Muslims, she said, that the disaster happened, to pay them for their sins. We felt really bad when she said all this about Muslims. And the whole time she kept saying, Muslims do this, Muslims do that, and no one in the class objected because we were afraid of being hit by her. Now, I have shared with you so many of these children's voices, one after the other, because I want us to feel. I want us to feel how relentless this daily brutal humiliation can be, and how soul-destroying for a child who actually has to say, why did God make me a Dome? Or sometimes, I don't like being a Muslim. In a recent article, Supreme Court lawyer Shahrukh Alam wrote about what constitutes hate speech. And I want us to pay some attention to these words. Hate speech, she writes, is often posited against free speech, as if they were complementary ideas. In truth, the concept of free speech stems from the idea of equality, from the democratic impulse, whereas the tendency towards hate mongering is mired in the oldest, most archaic bullying for power. In that sense, hate speech is almost a misnomer. for it isn't a speech problem. It is a problem of systemic bullying with an eye towards exclusivist political power. The incitement is not always meant to lead to physical violence. It is in itself violent, in its persistent stigmatizing and calls towards exclusion. She continues, hate speech does not refer to offensive or foul-mouthed speech directed at a people or even to vitriolic complaints directed at the government. It is speech that can cause actual material harm through the social, economic, and political marginalization of a community. Hate speech is not random vitriol. It feeds into a broader context of discrimination. These are not solitary acts of deliberate outrage or provocation, which might result in mere hurt sentiments. End quote. Yet when we discuss, when you and I discuss, when we write op-eds and we fulsomely condemn hate speech, we don't really think of all the things that are being said in classrooms. And I think we need to make that shift. I'm going to change gears and ask ourselves the question of why. Because this is where we are today. A nation forged from the fires of partition, we promised ourselves a secular India, and today we blame 9 and 10 and 11-year-old Muslim kids for sins their fathers did not commit. As Dalit assertion has grown, so has the violence. And our classrooms are paying the price for tough conversations that we never had. So why did this happen? Because the truth is that 75 years ago, when we stood on the horizon of freedom, we did promise ourselves the end of this hierarchy. We promised ourselves the end of hierarchy based on caste, on religion, on gender, and so much else. And the framers of our constitution were alive and alert to the grave harm that social division does. We gave ourselves Article 15, the state shall not discriminate. We gave ourselves Article 16, equality of opportunity for all. We gave ourselves Article 17, the abolition of untouchability. And in directive principles, we gave ourselves Article 39 that speaks of giving our children freedom and dignity. We gave affirmative action to Dalits and tribals. Where did we go wrong? I think our leaders just desperately, perhaps naively, hoped that there was something inexorable, inevitable about the march of modernity, and that the modern man and modern woman would leave behind this medievalism of caste and community and as primary markers of their identity, as we embraced a scientific temper and a new humanism. These were the dreams, right? We would embrace identities of ourselves as citizens of a free land. We were expected to grow less and less and less attached to ascribed identities, the ones that we were born with. We were to forge bonds as citizens to our republic and to each other. A secular state with diversity of equals. But instead of talking, we boxed our secular promise into familiar tropes. Unity in diversity, right? That's our most familiar, beloved secular trope. Unity in diversity. It looked grand, but it was never the grand diversity of equals, because the optics of unity was not matched by justice and equity on the ground. Imagine today the trauma and the plight of a child who has to trot out his skull cap for the National Unity in Diversity photo op, knowing well that the same skull cap can get him lynched to death on a train today. I think Muslim children have for far too long faithfully discharged this nationalist burden of representing India's rich diversity, and they've lived out the tropes of being this community of rich kebabs and fragrant biryanis and silken ghararas. while slipping deeper and deeper into the abyss of poverty, lack of education, and joblessness. That has been the reality of the Muslims while we've hung on to these and expect kids to perform to these tropes of being the community of rich kebabs and silken ghararas. Well, you know, the Sachar committee tells us that for a large majority of Muslims, the purchase of meat for kebabs is actually now very expensive, and pure silken ghararas are entirely out of the question. So there's this huge disconnect between these images we have lived and the reality on the ground. And we have imagined some inclusive equality through tropes and through false representation, actually. And we've handled real inequality in our classrooms rather poorly. Yes, we've given scholarships. Yes, we've given reservations. And yes, we've enacted multicultural Republic Day parades, but we did not have the big bigotry conversation in our schools. And even as the kinds of things that I have described were being experienced by children in schoolroom after schoolroom, we have remained in denial because simply putting all children in the same uniform does not change social hierarchy and does not end prejudice. And just as an aside, I wish someone would have enlightened the honorable justices of the Karnataka High Court of this truth, that uniforms do not create equality. I now want to speak of laws, having spoken of the problem. Now, I do not believe for a moment that laws are the solution to our social problems. But it's important to examine legal protections, because laws in their very existence set a kind of a moral benchmark of what is not considered acceptable in our society. So murder and rape, not okay. Bigotry, prejudice, and discrimination is also not okay. Have we said that, though, in our laws? Well, actually, on widespread prejudice, on widespread bigotry across spaces, sites, schoolrooms, boardrooms, houses, malls, private sector, public sector, parks, we have actually, as a nation, said nothing and done nothing. In most democratic jurisdictions around the world. And I want us to recognize this about India. In almost all democracies around the world, America, South Africa, Canada, Australia, you name it, acts of discrimination are actionable. Civil cases can be filed, and until such time as people keep their prejudices to themselves, there can be consequences and there can be correctives. In fact, democratic nations with far fewer endemic and deep-rooted social prejudice and social hierarchies generally have more than one anti-discrimination law and multiple mechanisms to protect against all kinds of discrimination. It could be based on gender, on race, on ethnicity, on religion, disability, sexuality, even age and marital status. India is, of course, a unique democracy in far too many ways. One, of course, is that we never tire ourselves of calling, of naming ourselves the world's largest democracy, as if size is what really matters. But among its very unfortunate unique features is that we remain today perhaps the only modern democracy without any comprehensive statutory protection against widespread discrimination. We have the constitutional right to equality, not backed by a justiciable law. We've got nothing like the Civil Rights Act in America. We've got nothing like the Equality Act of the United Kingdom. I have always found that strange and inexplicable. Were we not serious about our constitutional declarations? I think, as I have just said, there was a naive and desperate hope that we would somehow leave all this yucky caste community stuff behind. And there was a secular denial that ascribed identities, the ones people are born with, are indeed resilient and strong. And also, I dare say, I think it cuts too close to how much our own silent privilege is the flip side of this reality. How much our privilege is implicated in structural injustice. So, a conversation about an anti-discrimination law was briefly started when the Sachar Committee report came out in 2006. And it was meant to be an equality commission. Equal Opportunity Commission, anti-discrimination laws, all of this was being discussed. But it was, it went on the back burner. About a decade later, an anti-discrimination and equality bill was introduced by Shashi Tharoor as a private member bill in Parliament. This was in 2017. That also, and it's a very good bill. I have read it, but it lapsed. We've been very slow to act. In fact, even to acknowledge atrocities, and I'm talking egregious atrocities against Dalits and tribals, as an independent nation, it took us 40 years. 40 years to enact the Prevention of Atrocities Act in 1989. That's far too long. And that is still today the main legal protection for Dalit and tribal children when they are beaten up and they are called names in our educational institutions. And it took us 40 years to enact that. But the truth is, it's still, the Prevention of Atrocities Act has its limit. For example, it cannot help a Dalit who does not get called for a job interview. Or is denied housing in an upper caste complex, or even the kids who are segregated in classrooms, unless someone also calls them casteist slurs and does it in full public view, because for the Atrocities Act to kick in, the indignity or the violation has to be in full public view with absolutely unimpeachable, visible evidence of casteism. So it doesn't protect against the silent and the resilient othering that I have talked about. So, given these giant gaps in our legal regime, the RTE that many of you mentioned before this talk, the right of children to free and compulsory education, of which Anita Kaul was a principal architect, it was pioneering in more than one way. We remember it and we applaud it because, of course, it made elementary education a fundamental right. But what goes unnoticed is that for the first time in Indian legislative history, discrimination in schools was named, it was acknowledged, and it was prohibited in a universal social legislation that applies to all citizens. This is in Section 9 of the Act. It unfortunately, at the time, it did not. The RTE did not include minority children in the category of protected children against discrimination. But I dare say that if such a law were to be enacted today, Anita Kaul or Vinod Raina, Anil Bordia, and the many visionaries who crafted that law would agree with me and say, yes, for God's sake, we need to amend it. And we need to include minority children in the protected category of children against discrimination. Despite this flaw, the Act raised hope. I was very hopeful. It was a historic opportunity. Let's build an anti-discrimination regime in our schools. But, as with so many social legislations, there were no hard and fast rules for implementation of many of its clauses. And there were no clear routes to implementing the non-discrimination or the anti-discrimination clause of the RTE. And honestly, I'm not sure that was really the hope. I think the hope was that a conversation in schools would be triggered, that schools would be mindful, that some public awareness would shift, that the school management committees would have the space to start talking about bigotry, about discrimination, about what's happening to their children, and that aggrieved parents could actually talk and maybe get even hollow assurances, but at least that conversation, that silence, that pretense, it should have, and it could have created that moral benchmark. Let's talk about the stuff that's happening to kids in schools. Let's make it so that it's shameful to treat a child differently. And my dream was that an equality declaration should be pasted on every school wall, saying something like, and just visualize something pasted on a school wall, on every school wall, that says, the Constitution of India guarantees the right to discrimination-free schooling. All students should be treated equally and with respect. No distinction between students on the basis of identity will be tolerated in this school. No form of differential treatment, either in the classrooms, in the playground, or any school activity is acceptable. And it is the duty of the school, the parents, the children, and the community to ensure, let's preserve and promote discrimination-free schooling for all. Some version of this, some version of these lines would have been my Dream Equality Declaration. And we even proposed this along with a slew of a lot of other measures when I was in the National Advisory Council many years ago. You know, why? Because public signage matters. When it comes to the elephants that we cannot and will not talk about, public signage is a very important thing. It matters, for example, that we have no sex selection posters across clinics and hospitals. It matters that auto rickshaws and taxis in Delhi have signs that say, this taxi respects women. I'm sure many of you have seen those posters. Now, it is not the solution. But what it is a public acknowledgement of the problem. It creates a climate. It starts a conversation in minds when we see. That's why public signage in a democracy is very, very important. It starts a conversation in the larger public sphere and it sends a message. So frankly, the conversation that we hoped would start about social division, about hierarchies and difference in our schoolrooms after the RTE did not materialize. And the reality is that while we do have cases of teachers and administrators being hauled up and suspended for graft and corruption and disbursal of scholarships and school uniforms, we have them being suspended for slapping, we have them suspended for inappropriate behavior with girl students, and that's all very good. Last year, 5 female teachers of a government's primary school in Agra were suspended for unethical behavior after a video of them dancing to a popular film song in an empty classroom surfaced online. Now, I mean, I dare say it's not appropriate behavior for teachers, but I think what got them suspended is just that women should not be having so much fun. Yes, and teachers do get suspended when there is terrible physical violence against Dalit and tribal kids. But no one gets suspended for the daily trauma inflicted by the good old-fashioned bigotry. So 13 years after enacting the RTE, discrimination remains among the most difficult forms of exclusions to prove in schools. A phenomenon least discussed in the school system, including in teacher training institutes. And the dominant tendency is to simply deny that difference exists. I mean, I find that quite rich, and I find that not possible because as a nation, look, you know, it seems to me there are 2 occasions when we are openly willing to talk about all the divides. One is election, of course. At every election, we display our abiding loyalty to caste and community. We unabashedly discuss Dalit, Brahmin, OBC, Kurmi, Koiri, Malla, Lingayat, Maratha, Thakur, Hindu, Muslim. We do that at every election. Matrimony. Glance at, and I do this often, by the way, just to keep reminding myself of where we are. Look at any number of matrimonial sites. Look at jivansathi.com, shadi.com, bharatmatrimony.com, and you will appreciate the large swathes of our population that values ascriptive difference. We learn from the air that we breathe that there is different power in these identities. Different social power, different political power, different economic power. And in that India, we imagine that our children are going to be magically treated equal and magically the same. हम तो बच्चों में कोई फर्क नहीं करते हैं, दीदी. In that India, where we have converted the art of nuanced difference. I mean, it's a fine art in this country. In that India, we deny that there are hierarchies and differences in our classroom. And this argument I have heard far too often is, oh, it's so divisive to rake up these issues. I'm sure someone will say that about this lecture as well, but I don't believe we can afford to be in denial anymore. The evidence is overwhelming. I'm going to change gears and take you to America. In 2016, the Southern Poverty Law Center, it's a leading American organization, devoted to translating the gains of the civil rights movement into practice. And it has a teaching tolerance program for educators, which decided to look at an emerging phenomenon in American schools. The program's director, Maureen Costello, heard stories coming in from educators across the United States about a sudden surge in bullying. So she sent out a questionnaire to about 10,000 educators, and she was shocked by the results. Here's what they were. Over 90% of educators said that the school climate had been negatively affected by the Trump election. The elephant in that room was that Mr. Trump's campaign had an effect. We could not avoid the fact that children were imitating him both in word, tone, and behavior. The Trump effect, according to the study, arises from, quote, comments the president made about immigrants and minorities, which, and I want to emphasize this phrase, comments the president made about immigrants and minorities, which emboldened politicized bullying in schools. Muslim children in particular were targets of hate, but also on the upswing, verbal harassment, the use of slurs, derogatory language, and disturbing incidents involving swastikas and Nazi salutes. A professor at the University of Southern California who studies school violence found these survey results quite unsurprising. He said, I get a lot of calls from schools and school districts. There has indeed been a 2-year spike in school bullying and harassment. And right now there is, quote, a generalized climate of permission to say hateful things to other groups that are deemed different. Now, I share this only to point to our analogous reality, that what is out there in the air, all the bile and hate that's spouted by politicians with mics and foghorns, it has a profound impact on children in schools. Like America post the Trump election, India is also amid a generalized climate to say and do hateful things. Just last month, the PTA of a leading private school in Delhi, just last month, sent a letter to parents with a range of concerns following the shift from online to physical school. Among the worries the letter articulated was this. There has been, quote, a growth in cases of bullying and displays of strength. The letter put it down to post-COVID adjustment. I think it partly reflected the violent forms of communication that have become part of our social fabric and media landscape, including the daily slow drip of Hindu-Muslim, Hindu-Muslim, Hindu-Muslim poison into the veins of our nation. And it's not just the content, it is the style, right? It's the aggression and the cheering and the laughter when some poor sod is vanquished under national arc lights of National Public Television. It's like a nightly world of happy family viewing where the only purpose is domination. An opposing viewpoint is there only for it to be shut up and put down, and crushing the weaker opponent. Crushing the weaker opponent is a foregone conclusion in all our televised nightly debates, but an entire theater is enacted around that kill. Children are simply imitating in style and manner this gladiator sport that they see night after night on their TV screens. And it represents to me the end of democratic dialogue and debate and civility. And we might well be witnessing an entire generation growing up. An entire generation growing up bereft of the very essence of a democratic way of being, forever seeking imaginary enemies to demolish, forever acting out on easy prejudice in displays of strength. So this is a what do we do moment. I have no answers. Yes, we need an anti-discrimination law in India, and we must campaign for one. We need to strengthen the RTE, the rules and the guidelines, and stop this bigotry in our schools. But honestly, when it comes to schools and to vulnerable children, I don't believe we can privilege an adversarial, an us versus them kind of an approach that resorts to courts and to the law alone. Because how many teachers can a school system suspend? And how many children can you book under the Atrocities Act? Yes, children as young as 10 and 11 and 12 have been booked under the Atrocities Act for being violent with other children. But I don't think that that is the way forward. Surely we must worry for those children as well. The ones who are acting on hate and prejudice, because hate harms the hater. And guess what? They're learning it from us, the adults. I think we have no choice but to create spaces to talk inside the school system. Now, I know that's a tough ask, especially today when we are being asked to believe that we are in some hyper-nationalist post-identity moment, right? When the mantra in the airwaves is one nation, one language, one ration card, one people, one community. That's the mantra in our airwaves. It's like an aggressive flattening of diversity, an aggressive denial of difference. And if there is no diversity and there is no difference, then the fault line of discrimination, poof, right? It disappears. So the conversation I am proposing then is we don't need to have it. At this moment, I would, how do we fight? How do we find a way to begin this conversation? And I would take a leaf out of Gandhiji's Book of Resistance. And I think October is an appropriate month to invoke Bapu, to remember Bapu. We remember him largely for ahimsa, for satyagraha. He was actually, and I remember him also for being a masterful communicator. Gandhiji knew that ideas of satyagraha would never work unless he was able to build up public opinion. And he did not count on a hostile media to create that public opinion. He started his own journals, one after the other after the other. He wrote and he walked the streets to create that public opinion for freedom. I think many more of us need to make those journeys. Enter the classrooms. Study what lurks beneath the surface, what is not immediately visible. If we are serious about a democratic future of equality for all, then we have to engage critically with the classroom as sites that are reproducing inequality on a daily basis. The Indian education system is one of the largest in the world. Over 1.5 million schools, 8.5 million teachers, and 250 million children. If what I have spoken about is affecting even 10% of these children, either at the receiving or the giving end, that is 25 million children too many. We need to remember in this moment, when we are witnessing hate assemblies making calls for violence against minorities, when an elected representative, a member of parliament no less, has taken that first unthinkable step and openly called for an economic and social boycott of an entire community. And I trust all of you are abreast with that news. In that moment, we must remember from history that genocide never begins one fine day with genocide. It begins with the everyday othering and the bigotry that I have described, which is a frightening part of our classroom realities. And if we are to regain a democratic future, then we need to do everything in our power to stem that rot in the hearts of our children. I will end with words from a seminal judgment for equality, which was really a breath of such fresh air. It was delivered by Justice Sudhanshu Dhulia just 6 days ago on October 13th in a split verdict by a two-judge bench of the Supreme Court of India on the Karnataka hijab matter. and the matter will now go before a larger bench. But until then, let us take from these words that eternal hope that I started my lecture with. Here's what Justice Dhulia wrote. The question of diversity and our rich plural culture is important in the context of our present case. Our schools, in particular, our pre-university colleges, are the perfect institutions where our children, who are now at an impressionable age, are just waking up to the rich diversity of this nation, and they need to be counseled and guided so that they imbibe our constitutional values of tolerance and accommodation towards those who may speak a different language, eat different food, or wear different clothes or apparels. This is the time to foster in them sensitivity, empathy, understanding towards different religions, languages, and cultures. This is the time when they should learn not to be alarmed by our diversity, but to rejoice and celebrate this diversity. This is the time when they must realize that in our diversity is our strength. Thank you.
Thank you, Farah. Thank you. I'm sure you'll all agree that that was just not just any talk. It was a rendition meant to stir us out of our slumber and our thoughtlessness. Thank you also for shining light on what has been invisibilized for so long in our increasingly majoritarian discourse, and to urge us to hear the heartbreaks in the silences and the shadows of marginality and precarity caused by the violence of prejudice, hubris, and stereotyping. And to be cognizant of the large sections of our compatriots who retreat on account of alienation or fear or anger because they are systematically denied voice and justice. The time has come, as you said, to transform our schools from safe spaces to brave spaces. I've heard you with rapt attention, as everyone in this room. You may have noticed that they were riveted by what you said. Yes, we must become social archaeologists, and we must expose the denial that is becoming pervasive. And not just the elephant outside the classroom. We have to watch out for it. It is the wolf that is knocking at our door persistently. I was asked to say a few words, but I think we've heard Farah, and I don't want to hold up the Q&A, but just a couple of quick comments because Sanjay asked me, and I don't want to take up too much time. We all know that the catastrophe of childhood is that its tragedies are eternal. It takes a great deal of hard, sensitive, mindful work to wean young people away from the effects of negative conditioning, or may I say, indoctrination, both at the home and at the school. And the antidotes do indeed lie in a different mental diet to harness the potential of education. The issues that you highlight, Farah, the examples that you cite, raise the question, how do we begin this hard work, restoring the ripped canvas of coexistence? How must we atone for the trauma inflicted on a Indra Kumar Meghwal, on a Meena, a Sahir, a Javed, a Priya, a Salman, and a Sana, subject to the subtle forms of what I would call apartheid and humiliation that become part of their quotidian experience, certainly not by denial. It is about countering the onslaughts of the slurs, the hate speech, and the legitimization and normalization of violence through our own everyday resistances and daily mutinies, not necessarily spectacular acts of revolution, but by persistent, patient forms of individual, non-violent citizen satyagraha. And you talked about teaching tolerance in the US, and of course, all of us remember Rosa Parks, who in 1955 refused to get off the bus because she was being asked to leave on account of her race in the segregated atmosphere that existed in Alabama. And she was glued to her seat and to her dignity. She was, of course, thrown off the bus, but she lit the fuse for social dynamite. So there is indeed power. And she also turned on its head the notion of peace, not just as a woman in white, passively wholly passive, but as someone to whom it's given to rock the ship of the state. And as Maria Montessori said, all governments can do is to keep us out of war. Building a lasting peace is the work of education. So waging peace, looking at building critical thinkers, looking at the classroom as a space that brings in both intersectionality and the lived experiences of the many realities and the background, social backgrounds that students come from, as our two young, bright stars this evening shared with us, with compassion, with empathy, and also recognizing that shall I say, the constructivist classroom is an enriching space of experiences of the lived realities in the co-creation of knowledge, not knowledge as a hierarchical experience. And there's so much we can talk about that. I just wanted to share with you, and I don't know how many of you have been to Dharamsala at the time of Losar, the New Year celebrations. There are lots of chanting and prayers and so on that go on. But there is a very significant ritual that is performed, and that is that every year a prayer is sent out for the Chinese. So the Tibetan community sends out a prayer for the Chinese so that the veils of ignorance and prejudice can lift from their eyes. And I think Farah mentioned that the perpetrator is as much a victim, as much dehumanized, and does need some rescuing. We are all aware of the great work that Teaching Tolerance does, but we are also aware of the spaces of conflict where education has played a conflict-enhancing role. As a weapon in cultural repression in Bosnia and Turkey, denial of education as a weapon of war in the Palestinian schools, education as a means of manipulating history for political purposes in Nazi Germany, education as serving to diminish self-worth and encourage hatred among the Hutus and the Tutsis. There are several examples. And now, of course, we see in Afghanistan the denial of education for women as a weapon of power and patriarchy. But I did want to, you spoke about the audacity of faith and hope. And I would like for us once again to remember Mahatma Gandhi, who said, "I do not want my house to be walled in on all sides and my windows to be stuffed. I want the culture of all lands to blow about my house as freely as possible, even though I refuse to be blown off my feet by any of them. Mine is not the religion of the prison house, but it has room for all mankind. And it is proof against insolent pride of race, religion, or color." And I just wanted to share another small anecdote. I stumbled upon, as I was reading through Farah's riveting paper, an old postcard that I had received from Ramu Gandhi, the philosopher, the former Ramu Gandhi. He was Mahatma Gandhi's grandson and a denizen of the IIC. Those of you who frequent the IIC would have seen Ramu, and many of you are friends of his. It had the image of a little Chinese boy held aloft with his hands folded around the multitude of helmets of security forces, forming a pattern that looked something like a lotus at the Tiananmen Square when the repression happened in Tiananmen. And it read, "In the midst of death, life persists. In the midst of untruth, truth persists. In the midst of darkness, light persists. In the midst of hate, love persists." And when I looked at it closely, it shone with an unfamiliar light. And I think it is that kind of light that bathed people like Anita Kaul. We need more such light, thanks to people like Farah and Harsh, to see the elephants both within and without the room. Thank you all, and we'll take questions and comments. For anybody who'd like to, we'll have about 10 minutes. Is that fine? Yeah. Thank you very much. Any questions, comments? Anybody would like to respond? May I call on Rohan if he's here to just share a little bit about that experience as a child representing the essence? Oh, there's a question. So, there's a question from the online audience. What is it? Cut in the allocations to universities has resulted in self-financing courses, even in the state university system. Their fee is so high that is a kind of reservation for the rich. Since private sector does not recruit through open advertisements and contact work in appointments, the poor will find it increasingly difficult to find salaried jobs. What can be done to address these issues? It's about marginalization and so on.
Maybe we can get.
Maybe let's get a few more questions.
Any other
This is
comments
from
or
Siraj Hussain. Any more questions, comments?
Hello?
Yes, sir, please. Would you identify yourself? So
मेरा
that
नाम रमजान है, मैं डिपार्टमेंट ऑफ पॉलिटिकल साइंस यूनिवर्सिटी ऑफ दिल्ली से हूँ। फराह मैम, आपका लेक्चर बहुत अच्छा था और मुझे ऐसा लगा कि मतलब एक ऐसा फील हुआ कि आप मेरी कहानी जो है वो नरेट कर, जैसे कि मेरा नाम रमजान है वैसे, लेकिन 6 से लेकर 10th क्लास तक मेरा जो क्लास टीचर था उसने मुझे रहमान और अलग अलग नामों से बुलाया, मतलब उसको कभी मेरा नाम याद ही नहीं रहा। और जो मेरा पहला जो सार्वजनिक नाम जो मेरे पेरेंट्स के अलावा मुझे दिया गया वो कटवा था। और उसके अलावा हालांकि जब मैं 6th क्लास में था तो मुझे मेरे एकेडमिक परफॉर्मेंस के बेसिस पे मेरे क्लास टीचर ने मुझे मॉनिटर अपॉइंट किया था, लेकिन जैसे ही जो है उनका ट्रांसफ़र हुआ, बच्चों के पेरेंट्स ने ऑब्जेक्शन उठाया कि एक स्लम एरिया से बिलोंग करने वाला एक मुस्लिम जो है कैसे जो है वो क्लास मॉनिटर बन सकता है। और उस वजह से 6 महीने बाद ही मुझे बिना किसी कारण बताए मुझे वहाँ से उस पोजीशन से हटा दिया गया। इवन जो है मेरे पास फेलोशिप है, मैंने कोशिश की, क्रैक किया उसको, लेकिन मेरे जो दोस्त हैं, क्योंकि मैं जैसे कि गोपीनाथ मैम ने कहा कि हम सेफ साइड जो है वो प्ले कर रहे हैं, और मैंने भी शायद ऐसे ही अपनी लाइफ में उन ऑप्शंस को चूज किया जो थोड़ा मतलब मुझे सेफ बना के रख सकते थे। जैसे कि मैंने दोस्त वो बनाए जो मेनली मुस्लिम नहीं थे, जो हिंदू कम्युनिटी से बिलोंग करते, ताकि मेरी जो इमेज है वो उस मतलब मेरी जो इमेज है वो इस तरीके से जो है ट्रीट ना की जाए कि ये एक मुस्लिम कम्युनिटी से बिलोंग करता है। और उसी तरीके से मेरा पहनावा भी उसी तरीके का है कि मैं थोड़ा सा सेफ जो है रहना चाहता हूँ कि लोग मुझे एक मुस्लिम आइडेंटिटी के बेस पे जज ना करें कि मैं एक मुस्लिम हूँ, और उस वजह से मैं ऐसा सोचता हूँ। इवन हालांकि मैं रिजर्व कैटेगरी से बिलोंग करता हूँ, लेकिन मेरा जो फेलोशिप है वो मैंने जो जनरल स्कोर है उससे भी ज़्यादा मार्क्स से जो है मैंने अचीव किया, लेकिन इसके बावजूद जो है लोग मुझे, जो मेरे स्कूल के दोस्त हैं, जब मैं उनको बताता हूँ कि मेरे पास फेलोशिप है तो वो कहते हैं कि जरूर जो है रिजर्वेशन कैटेगरी से इसको जो है फेलोशिप मिला होगा। तो मेरा आप दोनों से जो है एक, मैं आप लोगों से एडवाइस लेना चाहता हूँ या सजेशन, मुझे आइडिया नहीं है कि वो जो सेफ साइड से ब्रेव साइड जो है, कैसे जो मैं अपने पर्सनैलिटी को, अपने लाइफ को जो है मैं उसकी तरफ जो है ट्रांसफर कर सकता हूँ, मुझे कोई आइडिया नहीं है इसका।
Shukriya. Thank you. Any other comments? I think there's a note for you, Farah. Someone who's really appreciated what you've said about the elephant outside the classroom. What kind of equality can we expect for all, I wonder? And then he's made another comment. Do we really want equality for all? So that seems like a sort of a counterintuitive question, but you might want to comment on the larger concerns that were established, that were expressed.
Yeah, you know, I have no answers. The point of a lecture like this, or the point of a conversation, should be that we all start thinking about those answers. Because if I had the answers, then that's what my lecture would have been. It would have been a series of solutions. It was not. It was an articulation of the problem. Is equality achievable? Is perfect equality achievable? No. But is constitutional equality achievable? Is legal equality achievable? Is social equality achievable? You know, frankly, as far as I'm concerned, let me give you an example of the kind of equality that all citizens want and deserve. Is that you want equality when there is any kind of violation. You want to be able to go to your police station, and it doesn't matter what his own views are about any caste or any community or any religion. And that moment he is a constitutional office holder upholding my constitutional rights. So whether we're going to succeed in our lifetime or in 10 lifetimes to internally transform every human being, that is not the goal. We are talking about, and private schools are also public institutions. Yes. These are, and in both private and public institutions, and particularly in government schools, the point is not, are we going to take on this insurmountable challenge and turn every school teacher? Look, I would be delighted if every school teacher would shed every casteist or communal or gender differential or views against somebody of this or that sexuality. There are so many prejudices that we have. Let's not finger point at teachers. We are a society that is riven with all manner of prejudice. We hide it better than perhaps a teacher in Balia does. She thinks no one is watching. So they will act in a particular way. The point is, whatever your prejudice, keep it to yourself when you're performing a duty, when you're performing a public duty like educating our children, when you're performing a public duty like being our first port of call when I go to the police station and my rights are violated. I think certainly that equality we can aspire to. Absolutely. I want to just respond आपके सवाल का आपका एक्चुअली सवाल नहीं है, आप एक तरह से बराबरी की ख्वाहिश और कुछ नहीं। जो आपने कहा कि मैंने अपने आप को कम मुसलमानों के साथ की संगत बढ़ाई, मैंने ज्यादा हिंदुओं के साथ संगत बढ़ाई, क्योंकि मैं अपने को, जैसे आपको याद है कि मैंने अपने टॉक में भी एक बच्चे का जिक्र किया जो कहता है sometimes I don't like being Muslim. वो जब रोज रोज प्रेजुडिस का एहसास होता है किसी को भी, तो सब मतलब एक तरह से बचाव के या जीने के हथियार तो ढूंढते हैं, लेकिन आपका हथियार आई थिंक ये ना हो कि आप उड़ान भरना छोड़ दें या आप ख्वाब देखना छोड़ दें। कि आप यहाँ आए और आप के जज्बे को इन लफ्जों ने छुआ और आपने उठ करके बोला, यह आपकी कॉन्फिडेंस का प्रतीक है. So all I can say to you is that we cannot, you see, that is the worst thing that this daily trauma does. It robs people of the ability to dream. I mean, isn't that what our schools are supposed to be? Is जितनी बड़ा सपना देख सकते हो देखो, आसमान तक उड़ान भरो. यही तो हम कहते हैं ना अपने बच्चों से स्कूलों में. वो पर कट जाते हैं जब बच्चों के साथ इस तरह का व्यवहार होता है, भेदभाव होता है. तुम दलित हो, तुम गंदे हो, हम ऊंची जात के, तुम नीची जात के. और उस वक्त मॉरल अथॉरिटी उस क्लासरूम में टीचर होती है. टीचरों पर हमने बहुत कम तवज्जो दी है. उनकी तनख्वाहें कम हैं, उनकी ट्रेनिंग अनुचित है. So I mean, I think it's, as a society, we don't, you know, is it anybody's dream job to, hey, I want to be a primary school teacher? No. We've not given it the kind of social status that it deserves. And so, I mean, there are larger systemic issues about why we are in this kind of mess. So, you know, there was a question about, you know, public and privatization of, look, my position is, I'm no expert on the specific issue that he's asked about. And if there are others in this room, they can perhaps volunteer to answer about, but privatization is obviously going to leave out anybody who doesn't have the money. I mean, it's a no-brainer. It doesn't require, you know, an IQ to figure that one out. That it is it's an anti-poor, it's an anti-marginal community. It's not something that Dalits and tribals and Muslims are, and people who come in the EWS category are going to be able to access. And there's another thing this young boy said is ki sab kehte hain humko ki tum to reserved category se aaye ho. You know, this was many people mentioned this was something Anita really fought for, the EWS quota. But until, you know, very recently, and these are very recent conversations, I'm also a parent. I also have a 15-year-old son. And I'm very much part of the kinds of conversations that are going on in private schools as well. And they are called, so a substitute teacher walks into a private school room handling a bunch of children and tells them, why are you so badly behaved? Are you quota children? Is this a government school? This happened in a private school. So the idea of being a quota kid, and for Dalits, no matter how well you do, teachers will say, तुम्हें पढ़ के क्या मिलेगा? तुम्हारे पास तो reservation है ना? ये आरक्षण का जो ताना कसना कि जैसे हम कोई मतलब देश से कोई लड्डू छीन रहे हैं, नॉट कि हजारों साल कि आपकी दबंगता का हम हक इख्तियार कर रहे हैं, वो नहीं. लेकिन ये रिजर्वेशन कोटा से आना, ये तो आप यूनिवर्सिटीज में सुन लीजिए. The teachers who come from reserved category also have to confront this. So, you know, that stigma hasn't gone. We've got those kids in, but we have to work a hell of a lot harder to get the stigma of being a quota kid, आरक्षण बच्चा, ये तो कोटे से आए हैं. You know, that kind of attitude requires a lot of hard work and conversation that makes people uncomfortable, you know, and so we don't end up having those conversations that we need to.
So I just want to draw on something you said, you know, the audacity of hope. And there are so many activists here. I mean, I can't name everyone, but there's Harsh, Apurvanand, Anita Kaul, all of these people who do believe that it is incumbent on us to assert our daily resistances and everyday mutinies. And that space, those enabling spaces, despite the structural violence, despite the structural constraints, have to be constantly worked at. As Lasky said, you know, you have to win freedom for yourself every day like you conquer love. The battle of freedom is never done and the field is never quiet. So the choices that we make as parents, the choices that a teacher makes to celebrate Christmas and Eid with the same passion that she celebrates Diwali, the landlord who opens up the space for people who cannot get a flat or a space to live in Delhi or anywhere else, the parent who encourages, like Anita did, her children to have a diversity in terms of friends, and the parent who nudges the child to think beyond merit in the conventional sense and see it really as a social privilege. There are any number of actions, and to move beyond the safe provision of personal gratification and to engage. I mean, Pamela Philippos is here, and she does this all the time, to look at those areas where it is possible for each of us to act. It's not given to all of us to make a revolution, but the spaces for intervention on a daily basis in asserting democratic citizenship, as you mentioned, and you've exhorted us to do, is something that we'd all like to take away from you, Farah, your work, and of course, the inspiration that Anita has left for us to follow. Thank you once again for being such a wonderful audience, so engaged in the sense that I was looking around the room and everyone was so immersed in your rendition. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Farah, for such a profound and significant talk today. Thank you, Dr. Gopinath, for sharing the session and for sharing your insightful thoughts about the discussion. I also thank all the guests for their questions and feedback. So now moving forward, I would like to invite Amrita Jain, Chairperson, Mobile Creches, to kindly present the mementos to the speaker and the chair. Thank you so much, Amrita ji. Now, may I please invite Sumitra Mishra, Executive Director, Mobile Creches, to conclude the session and provide the vote of thanks.
Good evening, everyone. Good evening, Dr. Gopinath. Good evening, Farah. I've been wondering what Anita would have felt today in this room as the conversations progressed through this evening, what she had imagined as her vision for building the new India and through the Right to Education Act, and how really the unsaid and unspoken remained invisible, and calling it out today, what it would have meant for her and what would she have done, whether it was in relation to the non-discrimination law that we spoke about, or calling out and the everyday mutinies that you mentioned. It is in her memory that we continue to keep the fight on and keep the hope on. So thank you so much, Dr. Gopinath, for your leadership, for having seen and experienced many of the examples that Farah shared during your tenure, and having fought against it and stood against it and given leadership to what really the arc of education means in building an equal society, in building a human world beyond the scriptures of education. So thank you for continuing to do that for all of us. Thank you, Farah, for really calling out the elephant today, for really calling out the elephant both inside the classrooms, outside the classrooms, in our own lives, in our own neighborhoods, and for really urging all of us to look within, because after all, it is us and them, and the othering starts with each one of us. And it is for each one of us to begin to look at ourselves and say, how can I call out the othering to myself? Where am I making a mistake, and where can I step up and make a change? Thank you so much, Farah. This is going to stay with many of us for a very long time. Thank you. To all Anita's friends, colleagues, admirers, students, both here in this room and in the virtual audience, thank you all for coming year after year, for giving us an opportunity to share Anita so warmly between all of us, and to keep rekindling our faith and our hope that we live by some of her idealism and lots of doses of her pragmatism, because she did fight a winning battle. So thank you all for reconnecting, for giving a purpose to another year of looking forward to the next version of the Anita Kaul Lecture. Thank you, Sanjay, for being so generous in sharing Anita with all of us year after year. Thank you. That means a lot to everyone in this room here and outside. It means a lot to young people that we've heard today. It means a lot to people who couldn't join, but people who remember her a lot. So thank you, Sanjay. Thank you, Rohan. Thank you, the entire Kaul family and the Kriplani family, for sharing Anita with us so generously. Harsh, for carrying the collective burden of morality on your shoulders so courageously and so lightly, and for making it your default mission to call out the elephant inside and outside each time. So thank you for doing that. And thanks to all colleagues at Center for Equity Studies and Rainbow Foundations for coming together to make this evening possible. Board members and my team at Mobile Creches, thank you for standing together every year, for having a somber evening, but also an evening of celebration, an evening of rekindling of faith and hope, and a rekindling of our values of what we really are as citizens of this country, and how do we remind ourselves of our constitutional obligations to everyone, to each other, but mostly to the children of this country and to the youngest children of this country. I must not fail to mention as Mobile Creches. So thank you all of everyone at Mobile Creches. I will end here, but I must end with a special word of thanks to you, Ramzan, for really underlining what Farah meant to say, and for speaking up about your experiences, because that really underlined what Farah was trying to tell us. So by even sharing your experiences and by standing up and talking about yourself, you did make that move from the safe space to the brave space, isn't it? And you probably do that every day of your life, but because it's become so much of a part of your survival options and your choice that you don't even realize that you're fighting this brave battle every day. Thank you very much for sharing what you did with all of us. Have a very warm evening, lots of love, good health, happiness, joy, and peace this Diwali season to all of you. Thank you very much, my friends.
Very much for what you do and you continue to do.
Yeah, there's no further agenda. Just we have printed Farah's lecture, which you will find. Of course, as you would have noticed, she went off the scripted what you find, but the essence and spirit of what she wanted to say would be there. So please collect copies of the lecture. In fact, they're being distributed to you. Thank you all, and good night.
Thank you.
Encouraged.
Yes.
If it got the point
Yes,
across.
unorthodoxly.